So, one of the things about me is that I am an older millennial. So, I was born in the mid 80s. And when I was a kid, every year, every summer, me and my sisters would go and we would go and stay a week at our grandma's house. That's my mom's mom. And then we would spend a week at my grandparents' house. That's my dad's parents. And my grandma, my mom's mom, even though she didn't have a lot of money, she had like government checks or something. She couldn't work. She had really bad arthritis and a lot of other health issues. But she would save up her checks, and every year she would take us to do fun things like we would go to the state fair. She took us horseback riding. She took us to, every summer that we would stay with her, we would go and do something fun and make memories with her, even though she didn't have a lot of money. For Christmas, we would get like, fruits and like fruits and nuts and like, I don't know, not much, but it was the memories, it was the experiences. And my mom's parents were born in like 1930s, I believe. My dad's parents, they were born in the 1920s, and they grew up during the Great Depression. My grandpa, my dad's dad, fought in World War II. Actually, when he was in World War II, he was shot and he was in a hospital, and the rest of the guys that were, that he was stationed with ended up being on a boat that sunk, and so a lot of them died, and he survived. My dad's mom survived tuberculosis, and then they got married much later. For that time, they got married when my grandpa was in his 20s. My grandma was almost 30, and she was a little older than him. But they had both survived and kind of had this second life. And, when I would stay with my grandparents, I didn't enjoy it necessarily. They didn't have a TV, they didn't have radio. They just, my grandpa was a preacher, and he had a whole room that was just Bibles, and, he went to school for theology and history and stuff. But when I was younger, I didn't appreciate it. I thought it was boring. We had to, at my grandparents' house, do chores, recite the books of the Bible. And, they really didn't have a lot. They had a very simple life. They didn't have a lot of money. None of my grandparents did. But they ate healthy. They were very frugal. They always recycled everything. They didn't waste. They, my grandma and grandpa, were very involved in their community. My grandpa knew all of his neighbors, and he was the type of person, he would literally pick up hitchhikers to preach at them, which is so funny because I ended up being a traveler and like hitchhiking a lot, and by the grace of God and really the protection of God, bad things did happen to me for sure while I traveled, but I also had many like ministering angels that were sent to me, like people that just showed up and helped me out during really difficult times. Like there are so many people who extended that grace and help to me, and many of those people are no longer with us. Many of those people are no longer here. But I'm just really thankful for that. I feel like the younger generations who are raised by like boomers and Gen X and millennials, like, we've all lived through a lot of changes too. But like the silent generation, like my grandparents' generation, who were basically born like 100 years ago. My grandpa, if he was still alive, would have been 100 last year, and he lived to be about 90. My grandma lived to be 84. But, they understood, they lived through the Great Depression, they lived through the World Wars, or World War II, and, they understood scarcity and they understood living humbly. My grandparents always had a garden. Even my mom's mom, who, had a lot of disabilities and mobility issues, she also always had a garden. It was a very small garden. Um, my mom's mom sewed all of their clothes. They were, they didn't have a lot of money. And my mom was like embarrassed about that stuff growing up in like the 60s and 70s because my grandma would make all of their clothes and stuff. Of course, my dad's mom also would sew, and, they just, they knew about all of these, like, I guess now they would be called like life hacks or whatever. And it's crazy how just one generation lost all of that knowledge. Like my mom, because of growing up on the farms and stuff like that, she sort of rejected that because it was a lot of hard work, and they were poor. They didn't have a lot of money. My grandma, I guess it was my great grandpa that had a farm that my mom worked at, because my grandpa worked in the factories, and then my grandma worked like odd jobs. My other grandpa was a preacher and a teacher, and then my other grandma worked also odd jobs. She was a nurse for a while and did like secretary work. And, even though back then, the cost of living was so much lower, my family still lived very much in poverty. My mom got a job in high school, and she helped to support the family with that, with the waitressing job. But, people, there wasn't this culture of instant gratification. And if people wanted things, they had to seek it out or put effort into it, and it's sad because even in my family, like, we have some family heirlooms, but like a lot of that stuff, well, some things we didn't get back, some things were, they just weren't valued, and it's like things that were made in the past, in the golden age or whatever, things were made to last and to be passed down, and that was sort of people's generational wealth. For people that didn't have a lot of money, was to pass down heirloom furniture and dishware and silverware and things. And now everything is just made to be disposable. Everything is like insanely expensive. We have no patience, we have no attention span, and like myself included, and we've just gotten so pulled into the culture of like now. And I feel like a lot of what's going on politically and stuff too, especially with the the youth and like these really extreme, like, violent movements that are happening and stuff. There's just this lack of wisdom of the elders, because we have not been taught to respect our elders. And you can say, like, with the boomers and stuff like that, and they did sell out the younger generation, sadly. And like there's a lot of reasons for that. Again, like social engineering and stuff is like part of that, and these larger like globalization plans and stuff, like to these plans to destabilize things and recreate these new systems or whatever. They're more global in nature, and just this idea that some people deserve to suffer because of things that happened in the past and what people's ancestors have went through, or whatever these labels that have been placed and these value assignments that have been given to certain things and places and people and not others. And it's just, things used to be more just straightforward, and we had a sense of shared values and a sense of shared truth and a sense of shared culture, and a sense of shared history, and a passing down of culture and information and wisdom from one generation to the other. And we're really lacking that now. And I understand the anger and frustration of the youth, where it's like everything is unattainable. Having a partner, having a home, having stability, having a job that pays well, all of those things seem out of reach. But those things were never guaranteed either to any generation. We look back to these kind of golden ages of prosperity as the norm, when really they're not. And it's like we're heading into another very volatile time, a time of depression, a time of conflict, a time of war. But I think and you're starting to see this more and more. A lot of people, younger people, are starting to turn back to tradition. They're starting to turn back to church, especially like Orthodox and like Catholic churches, which have this sense of history and stability and structure, that a lot of the modern progressive religious movements don't have. And I'm just so grateful, I guess, like, to just summarize all of this. I know I rambled a bit, but like, I'm so grateful that I had the influence of the silent generation in my life, and I'm so thankful that I had the influence of like the elders in my life, like, for all of their faults as well, but I think about it so much, because as a child, some of the things that I hated going through, that were like the most boring and mundane, were actually some of the healthiest and best and most grounding experiences. And what I look back to, like, during these times, like, if my grandparents can survive through the Great Depression and the World War, and the extreme poverty and the illness and the diseases and all of these things, then I can too. I can tap into that resiliency too. And I think we need less urgency and more resiliency, less hysteria and more, seeking to be grounded, seeking to be rooted, seeking out the wisdom of our ancestors, seeking out the wisdom of history. I'm really learning more about the nuances of history outside of the critical race theory and like the gender ideology and all of this stuff. Like, just put that aside for a moment and look at things more objectively. And I guess that's all I'm going to say about that. I guess, for the sake of not trying to repeat myself over and over, I'm glad that I grew up with the family that I had. And I grew up, we weren't super poor, but we were definitely not well off. We were a single income family for most of my growing up. My dad worked, my mom occasionally had different odd jobs and things. And I disagree with my family on a lot. Even to this day, I have a lot of conflicts with them. But I'm really thankful that I had a certain level of like wisdom instilled in me, and it comes from God. It comes from God, and it comes from my good family members who did seek to do the right thing, and who did seek wisdom, and who did seek to follow God's laws. And I know I had other ancestors who made different choices and went down different paths, and I am, atoning for that in my own life from the generational sins and the ancestral sins of my own family. But anyways, in these difficult times, it's important to go back to what is solid and what is secure, and just drop the weight of all that which you don't need to carry. Worry about yourself, worry about your family, try and do the right thing, try and keep yourself safe, protect yourself from evil influences as much as you can. Don't get caught up in the mass psychosis and the mass hysteria, and just live your life according to God's laws. Do unto others, do the right thing. And that's really all you can do. At the end of the day, at the end of life, at the end of time, you will be judged according to your works, and you are solely responsible for yourself. So don't worry about what everybody else is doing. Just do what's right. And stay safe. Take care.